Okay, great. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction and a very warm welcome to everybody who's been here. And I think, well, just a huge round of applause to the whole team. Mohammed obviously has put in a massive amount of work to make this conference the success that it is. Sure, we'll see a lovely show of hearts coming up. There they are. But also to the other guys. I know Ron, and there's been quite a few people in the background who have been working really hard to make this happen. So a big thank you to those, and also a big thank you to all of you, especially those of you who have persevered and stuck with the program and devoted so much of your time over these last 2 days to join, really an excellent array of fantastic speakers over these last 2 days. I've been dipping in and out. There's been some fantastic presentations, some really good speakers. So yeah, thank you to all of you for participating, for being there in the chat box. Hopefully you're going to participate a lot in this session as well. I'm going to try and make it as interactive as possible. So my title, ELT Publishing, the tortoise or the hare. So if you think about, I'm going to admit that this presentation, I'm not a spokesman for the ELT publishing businesses. Of course, there are many big publishers and small publishers, but this presentation is more a reflection, I think, of my observations, having worked within the publishing industry for, as I said, almost a decade now, on some of the changes that have happened over the years, where we are, where we might be heading, and how perhaps publishing fits into all of these changes and all of these types of discussions that we have in ELT. So I'm going to reflect on the changes within ELT, and we're going to do that collectively. In this session, we're going to become a collective consciousness and work together. But I've done that by threading it through this idea of a story, the tortoise and the hare. So if you're not interested in my musings, hopefully you'll just enjoy the story as we go along. Of course, we've had 2 fantastic days of professional development here with Educast. I work for Macmillan Education, as he mentioned. And if you want to keep your professional development going, we have our Global Teachers Festival happening on Monday. It starts. So you can do 2 more weeks. You can turn 2 days into 2 weeks of professional development. And I will put the link in the chat box if you want to go and register after the session. In fact, after the other 2 sessions, keep this link, come back to it, and you can explore the festival. And there are a whole variety of topics going on. There are some around vocabulary teaching, grammar teaching, critical thinking, inclusivity, neurodiversity, the sustainable development goals, a whole load of things going on in this festival. So yeah, exactly. Susan and Sarah Hilliard are part of the festival itself. And again, you can, I've got my LinkedIn QR code at the end. It's not working? Okay, if you can, sorry, I know why I put the wrong thing. It's Macmillan English. That's my fault. See, typing it fast. There you go, macmillanenglish.com/GTF for Global Teachers Festival. So go to that and you can explore that in your own time. So today we're going to weave this presentation through this story, as I mentioned. And it's going to be the hare and the tortoise. I'm sure you all probably know the hare and the tortoise. Still isn't working. Okay, go to Macmillan Education on Google and you can find it's on the homepage. The Hare and the Tortoise is a classic fable, which is a traditional story which usually emphasizes a moral or a value. And in this case, the hare and the tortoise, it emphasizes this idea of being slow and steady that wins the race. And this is one of the classic Aesop's fables. I think there are a lot. This is classified as 226, apparently. So anybody not heard of the hare and the tortoise? I'm sure you have. If you haven't, we've got the story and you can find out all about it today. So I've taken this from a course book, fairly old course book. If you look at the artwork, it does look like it's quite old. I think it's probably about a decade old. And we can do this story together. So one day, the hare sees the tortoise on the way to school. Look at the tortoise. He has short legs and a heavy shell. He's very slow. I have long legs and I'm very fast. Look at me, tortoise. Bye. And I've blanked out the response from the tortoise. Anybody want to, we'll make this nice and interactive. Anyone got a response? Let's keep it clean. What might the tortoise say to Mr. Hare? Give a second. Anybody got any comments? You're probably trying to think of something. What could he say? He might say, wait for me, lucky you. Or he could be a bully, yeah. So he could be saying, be nice. Again, we're going to talk about these types of things in a little while. If I were you. Nice, good. Poor me. Oh, really? Poor me? Maybe not. Wait for me, I'm coming. See you on the other side. Maybe he's bullied and depressed. We're not sure. We don't know how the tortoise feels. But I like these ideas. We're certainly starting to think about feelings within the story rather than just using the story as a method to teach particular types of vocabulary or grammar. I will use AI. You will see. I love that, Yusra. Yeah. One day I won't need to be fast. I will outsmart you, which maybe we'll see later. There's a bit of a twist in this particular version of the coursebook story. You'll see in a little while. So I'm going to pitch some questions to you guys, and I want to kind of gauge what you guys feel around this idea of publishers, what we create, what we do, because we don't just make coursebooks, we do lots of other things. For example, the Global Teachers Festivals. And I muse on this a lot. So I always wonder whether or not publishers are the innovators, whether we are kind of driving improvements in classroom teaching, or whether or not we are responsive, whether we're traditional. So I'm going to ask for you guys, do you think publishers, do they innovate? Do they drive? Or are they traditional and they're responsive? Things change within the field of education, and then we react to that. Okay, think that we innovate. Innovators. Reactive. Okay, good. I think there's going to be a mixture, probably, of ideas. Okay, good. We got a couple more, maybe. Maybe we're driving innovative. Okay, for a lot of people are kind of leaning towards the innovative. I was going to set this up as a poll, but it takes too long. Nice just to get some feedback in the chat box. So a lot of people are kind of leaning into the innovative. I think probably there isn't a clear cut. I don't think we're one or the other. My personal opinion would be that there's too much interlinking, I think, between the world of publishing and classroom practice. For example, if I think about a particular secondary or high school product that we produce, the author is a practicing classroom teacher. So there's going to be so much overlap and so much publishers have enormous influence, but sometimes they're too big to change. Yep, they can be too big to make decisions. I guess that could be true. Innovators, yeah, but I think they definitely have advanced a lot. It's interesting to see what you guys feel, kind of, because there's going to be a variety of people here from a variety. Some of you might be using course books from publishers. Some of you might have very strong opinions about publishers. Some of you might be working the world of publishing. Some of you might be authors, for example. Good. Okay, so it's nice to see where people are kind of at. These are kind of big, broad questions that we're engaging with at the moment. And I've got a second question kind of related to this. Maybe you do use published material. Maybe you've chosen that yourself. Maybe you work within a particular school. Somebody chooses the course book for you. But again, something that interests me is why do so many, because so many schools and teachers and students around the world do look to and rely on published material for the teaching and learning of English. Why do you think that might be? And this is, again, I'll give you a few minutes because you might have some ideas around this. No material in particular lessons? Okay, see, there's a whole variety of approaches. Well, I'm going to try not to get too far out from the middle. For structure, good. So I guess one of the main reasons a lot of certainly big institutions, big school chains use it is to create structure within their their planning within their curriculum departments. People rely on their expertise. It's very hard to create material. It is. I've seen lots of places that do try to create their own materials with a mixture of success. They can create some very excellent materials. But if you've got 10 teachers all teaching the same level and the same, following the same curriculum, if they're creating their own materials, wildly different classroom experiences for teachers. So it can create a little bit of structure, as somebody said. Quite a lot of things coming in now. Yeah, they're usually based on frameworks. They can be very systematic. Harmony, good. Yeah, good. Okay, so lots of good ideas. So there are lots of good reasons. Then there are probably lots of good reasons why some people choose not to use them. If we think about very traditional course books, perhaps they were a bit too rigid. Perhaps they didn't include some of the ambitions of teachers and students, so, as somebody mentioned there in the chat. So there's pros and there's cons. And this is just, again, a second broad question to try and get us to think about, well, what do publishers do? Why do people use them? But I want to think really about kind of changes. Before we do that, let's have the second page of our story. So we've got to the school. They've decided to have a race. Ah, here's the tortoise at last. He's very slow and I'm very fast. Well, let's have a race and see who the winner is. Ha ha ha. A race with you? Oh no, don't be silly, tortoise. The hare and the tortoise get ready to start the race. 1, 2, 3, go. Now, in this case, I'm thinking very much about the hare as our innovator. I'm thinking very much about the tortoise as perhaps a slightly more traditionalist approach. And we've got our school setting, of course. So let's move on to number 3. I want to think about how things have changed within the field of ELT, and I've picked 50 years. So I went back to one of the earliest IATEFL. This is probably one of the biggest international conferences that there is. And I went back to 1975, 50 years ago, and I looked at the theme, the keynote. What was it? What was the theme of that particular conference in that particular year? I wanted to kind of compare what was going on, what was being talked about 50 years ago in comparison to the one of 2025. And it was quite interesting. The theme for the conference was teaching reading skills. So I think we would probably know and agree that 50 years ago, there was probably quite a very traditional approach to professional development within the field of ELT and various forms of research that were going on at the time. So people are already starting to kind of flood the chat box with all the different things that we would see now that we definitely wouldn't have seen 50 years ago. One of the interesting things about IATEFL 50 years ago was it was completely forbidden to show any published content within the presentations that people were giving during the conference, which I found really interesting. So there's been a massive change, especially, of course, AI we're going to move on to, but I think there's been lots and lots of other change. Good, more student-centered now, technology, interdisciplinary subjects, new methods, good. Autonomous learning. Someone says it's been a complete 360-degree change. Phonics has come out, new technologies, good, internet. I'm trying to scroll back up to see what I can see. Yeah, more materials, more methods, gamification, good. There's the whole things, and people can keep plugging your ideas in then, and we'll keep coming back to reflect on them. I think there's been a huge amount of change. In fact, not just in 50 years. If I think about course books from 10 or 15 years ago, there's been a massive change. And in fact, the story that we are doing, this Hare and the Tortoise, comes from a course book that is actually, I think, probably 11 years old now, maybe slightly, 11 or 12. And if we're going to look at the kind of comprehension, the kind of follow-up questions, the activities that were built around that story to see how those might have changed over time. Good project work, AI, technology sources, a lot of variety, I think. these aren't questions that I need you to answer, but these are the kind of questions that frame or wrap around that last question. Kind of food for thought, more for me, and relating the next section to this question of how things have changed over time. I'm going to be looking at that through the lens of rather than perhaps slightly more broad. But I'm also going to think about, well, how does that help us to think about how we create classroom activities? So we can perhaps make this next section as practical as possible as well, because of course, we all want lots of tips and advice and ideas and just kind of, I guess, delve into my mind about how I might approach some of these particular topics. So things for me, I think, how has published material for teaching and learning of English changed over those 50 years? And we'll look at an example of that. And then I think really what are the priorities now? And perhaps what are the priorities going to be in the future? Where are publishers at and where are publishers perhaps looking forward? I'm kind of planning ahead for the next steps, I guess. There's a whole lot more. Before I clock on, I will look at these. There are traditional colleagues. Yeah, okay, good. Nice. CDs have moved. I don't see CDs in any course books anymore. Traditional recording, they've got this course, ChatGTP. Lesson planning has probably changed a lot. Digital material, good. Okay, great. So let's keep some of these questions in mind. So I've got 8 topics. Of course, this list is definitely not going to be exhaustive. You can think of new things you can add to this list. You can add to my ideas. Like I said, this is a collective consciousness that we're creating, but I'm going to create the framework of how I think that things have changed over these 50 years, and we can keep adding to them. And what I want to do is decide whether or not we feel like each of these boxes, the publishers are innovators or responsives. I don't think that's a word, responsives, but we're going to use it anyway. So the first one, I think, as somebody mentioned, for sure, is classroom approaches. I think compared to 50 years ago in 1975, there are now a wider variety of methodologies that are being used. Of course, we have more traditional PPP types of methodologies, which are still very popular, I think, in ELT classrooms. Certainly in the region that I work in, we see a lot of people using traditional PPP methodologies. But we now have things like TTT. We saw in Yusra's presentation about project-based learning. They were talking about task-based learning. You've got play-based learning. If you think about it, the idea of play-based methodologies became really popular in the 1990s. There was lots and lots of very famous books written on the benefits of play in the 1990s. Yeah, project-based learning, which I'm going to look at. But this idea of recreating the classroom as student-centered spaces, I would have said that many years ago would have been very teacher-driven, a lot of rote learning, a lot of memorization, a lot of teachers standing at the front, projecting information that students had to learn, even in an English language classroom, probably not hugely communicative, although I'm sure there would have been some communicative activities that would have happened naturally, I'm sure. I wasn't around in 1975, so I am unable to tell you whether they were or they weren't, but I'm sure if anybody has done any reading of studies, I'm sure it would be probably quite traditional in 1975. And I think the modern classroom, we have a lot more variety of methodologies. Yeah, and perhaps in some places, they still could be very, very traditional in Iraq for sure. And I want to look at an example, because obviously we're talking about published material or published content, but we'll also look at other things that the publishers do as well. But when it comes to classroom methodologies, yeah, we do see someone, Ron, you mentioned project-based learning. And here, this example of a project that you would find, and many of the more modern courses include a lot of project-based learning because it allows us to focus on these additional skills, life skills. You'll see lots of things like creativity, structuring those projects to make it very easy for students to engage with a project and collaborate and practice those skills through those types of activities. The other thing that's definitely changed is coursebook content. So we were looking, as I mentioned, at this story of the hare and the tortoise. If we look at the kind of comprehension questions or the kind of follow-up questions. So if I look at that unit and it gets to the reading, they just plunge straight into the story. The teacher 10 or 11 years ago would say, today is going to be a reading lesson, where they would do the story, children would read it, and they would probably answer these questions. There's 2 sections to it. If we look at the first part, of course, the 3 first questions are closed questions. They're all yes and no answers. And the third, even the fourth one, who wins the race? I would say if you were thinking about Bloom's taxonomy, this is still very much a kind of remember. You could argue maybe that there's some understanding, but really the teachers probably told them the answer and they just need to remember whether it was a hare or a tortoise. That did win the race. So, okay, perhaps not too complex, the first section. And the second part, the read and reflect. Again, this could probably be done in quite a simple way. There's a bit of practice of the grammar there. They get to choose a favorite character, but there's not a whole lot of support for the teacher to really take this and take their students, I think, to the next level. This is 10, 11, 12, perhaps years ago, if you were teaching this particular course book. The emphasis very much is on the teacher to add to. And of course, teachers back then probably were very competent at adding, asking questions. Maybe they would have done, as we heard in the last presentation, maybe artwork. Maybe they had to draw their favorite. Maybe they had to label with the words that they know. Maybe they had to act out the story, which is one of the activities from the story itself. But let's look at perhaps a more modern course book. This is one that's come out more recently. And if we look at reading, it's no longer called reading. It's now called story time. So there's a different focus automatically. But we now have this idea of doing something before you read. So now we're having students practice other skills, things like prediction skills, thinking more broadly about what's going to happen within the story. What does the title mean? What's going to happen? Who's in the story? Who do you think you might see? And then we've got lots of other things going on there as well. So, okay, we've still got listen and read, but now we've got this question about where's Benny? So they've got something to focus as they go through the story. They're giving a point of reference, but acting out the story is, again, they're very much the same. They've got the story, and again, we're going to talk about that in the next section. But we've got things like better representation. If we're thinking about inclusion, we've now got a variety of different, perhaps ethnicities of characters going on. And I think stories within course books have definitely improved in terms of they're definitely not so much pieces of reading that have been kind of shoehorned into a unit so that students have access to a particular grammar point or to practice a particular grammar point. They're very much designed for the units now, I think. But also if we look at the follow-up activities, so now we are being directed to the activity books. So activity book is no longer additional, just extra practice. It's actually related to what we'll be doing in terms of the story itself. So we've got to think about the story, right? Yes or no. So we're not got questions now. So again, you could argue that these are yes and no because they're closed. But if you're thinking about differentiating your content, if you're thinking about getting your students to communicate and to collaborate, we could definitely differentiate this easier than we could with the previous activity, where it was just a closed question. Because, for example, I could put my students into pairs, maybe one stronger, one weaker, and I could ask the stronger student, okay, I'm going to show you the statement. There are storybooks. And I want you to change that into a question, which you're going to give to your partner, and then the partner has to answer the question. So you've got this extra element of students collaborating, working together. There's an additional communicative element to that. They're not just writing yes or no in their course books, all as a big group, which again used to happen a lot in the 1975 classroom. It would have been everybody. There are storybooks, everyone kind of collectively say yes or no, and then the teacher would ask them all to write yes or no, and they would move on to the next question. Now you can give your students a way to interact with this. They can change the structure of the sentence from a statement into a question and ask each other those in order to put that down. But then we've got this additional activity afterwards. So we're now thinking about different endings for stories. And this is now integrated into the book. It's there to help teachers to get students to pushed this idea of Bloom's taxonomy further up the pyramid. So now they have to choose a different setting and they have to draw that. And again, they could turn that into a communicative activity by getting them to present, perhaps in small groups. If you're worried that it's embarrassing for them to stand up in front of the whole class, some of them could do it in front of the whole class. Some of them could do it within small groups. Maybe they could pick one and then join a group that's all doing the same thing. They could all collectively do it, compare what's in their gardens, practice old vocabulary. There's lots of scope for you to be able to really get the students to practice and recycle language from previous units, and also enact some of that creativity, communication, and those other types of skills as well. This is kind of the difference for me in terms of the difference between older units. Certainly, this is just one aspect of it. This was just the reading or the story element of that unit, and how things have perhaps changed and are more, perhaps a little bit more supportive, I think, these days. So yes, I think there's now a more integrated approach to not just knowledge and not just skills, but if we think about the project-based learning, it can actually be calls to action. If you think about Harry Waters and his session and sessions that he's done in the past around the Sustainable Development Goals, this can inspire them to take the language outside of the classroom. Coursebook content, of course, is not just what's on the page anymore. You have all sorts of content related to the course. Could be on-the-go practice apps, for example, if you're teaching teenagers or adults. These things now exist that are related directly to what they're doing in class. We mentioned life skills. I just mentioned lots of things, but you can also have, for older, study skills as well, weaved into and integrated into the unit and the learning that they're doing. And other of these kind of future enabling skills, not just seeing English as something that you learn and will use in the future somewhere outside of the classroom, but that these skills are all interrelated and they will help students to succeed at university, to succeed when they enter the world of work. Humanistic approaches, and there's been a huge shift. I think in 1975, there probably wasn't very humanistic approaches to classroom learning. If I think about, I wasn't, as I said, around in 1975, but my parents were, maybe slightly before that. But yeah, there was a lot of things like corporal punishment in the UK. So I'm pretty sure well-being wasn't high on the agenda of the 1975's teachers. Not all of them. I'm sure there were some excellent teachers, but now, again, very much integrated into the unit. So if we go back very quickly, we have this part at the end, explore the story, and then, okay, who helps Alice? But when I help someone, how do I feel? Yeah. So we've got this social and emotional aspect, and we're helping them to understand that rapport in the classroom, building positive relationships, self-awareness, all of these social and emotional skills help them in their learning. They're not just nice skills that we want them to learn along the way. I mentioned representation. There's a lot of excellent improvements in terms of representation, inclusion. We mentioned how to differentiate. There's lots of differentiation activities. If you look through things like teachers' books, you'll find lots of ideas for how to teach to mixed ability classes, how to, like somebody mentioned about dyslexia. So there's lots of support, I think, now for teachers on these particular types of topics. And we've looked at a couple of examples in the time frame that we have. And again, if you think about the project, let's go back to the one we just looked at. Yes, it's very structured, but you have all of these other things now. So we hear things a lot, things like multimodal, multi-literacies. We've got things here about inspiration and again, representation, thinking about a hero, got personalization. We've got self-reflection. So we've got self-assessment, which probably wasn't done very much in the past, or certainly wasn't integrated into perhaps course book materials. Again, communication, we've got the classic 4Cs, creating, communicating, collaboration, a lot of thinking skills going on in the kind of beginning. Thinking about the topic, thinking about how it relates to yourself, all of these types of really important skills that students can learn. I love project-based learning, as you can tell. And then you have all these other things around things. For example, in primary, there's lots of things around wellness. One of the new products we have is Learning Learns. And before every story, they do a mindfulness activity. So there are mindfulness activities suggested there. So it says, do this mindful activity for a couple of minutes before we get into the story. So you're not just launching a story onto your students, you're getting them to get into the right frame of mind to be able to think about and enjoy the story. The enjoyment of the story is a big part of that interaction with your students, for them enjoying it, understanding it, thinking about it, reflecting upon it, thinking about it within their own lives, their own contexts. All of these things help them to make sense of and then absorb the language on top of that as well. The next one I got was global citizenship and SDGs. There would have definitely been no mention of the SDGs in our 1975 IA TEFL conference, because the term SDG wasn't even created at that point. But if I think about a lot of the work that I'm doing now, certainly in the Middle East and North Africa, a lot of it kind of driven by our Advancing Futures initiative, which is around encouraging conversations around the SDGs, how to integrate the SDGs into the classroom. So connecting learning to the real world, but not just teaching them about culture. Again, we used to think, well, we're teaching them English, so we need to teach them about English culture. And I used to see this a lot in early textbooks. You would have a section on British culture. We'll talk about food in one particular part of the unit. Now we think much more broadly about kind of cultural inclusivity, but not just connecting to the real world, but helping students to think about our place within that. How are we connected to others? How are we all interconnected? And of course, we now know that the students are using not just the internet, we know they're using AI. So thinking about how we can have conversations around that and how we can inspire them to be better to themselves, to be better to each other, and how to be better to the world around us. And then we've seen lots of really good, I think, examples throughout this conference in particular on that. And in the Global Teachers Festival, I know there are also some really nice sessions on how to integrate the SDGs into the teaching and learning of English. Food is a very common part, and it's not that these things aren't important. They are. Comparing, thinking about different types of cuisine. But I think that we can drive that further. One example of that is to look at where food comes from, who eats what, and how do we eat it, and all of these types of things. It's all quite connected, and it gets students to develop those critical thinking skills, and perhaps pushes them deeper into the topic. Let's look at some examples of perhaps what publishers have done around global citizenship and the SDGs. One really, I think, fantastic initiative, and it was the first one I'd ever seen, was from a secondary product, a high school product, depending on whether you say secondary or high school, which was the virtual classroom exchange. So in this particular product, Gateway to the World, if you were using this coursebook, you had a platform that you could go onto, a virtual classroom exchange, and connect with students who are also using that coursebook in other parts of the world. So if I'm in Egypt and I'm at a school and my school uses Gateway to the World, I could connect with a school in Croatia, or I could connect with a school in Mexico. And the two teachers would connect first, and they would choose one of the projects, because it was all designed around the project within the unit. And they had to present their projects. So students in Egypt would present their project to the guys in Mexico, and then they would switch and they would present it back to see how not only English people they think the same, they have different ideas, we have some commonalities, but how they think about problem solving, because a lot of those projects are designed on kind of problem solving for real world issues. For example, it could be around water or land or the sea, or how we use the oceans. So the Egyptians were students, teenagers, of course, thinking about that within their own context. And when they present that to the guys in Mexico, they think, I've never thought about that idea in my context. What happens if we was to use that here? And again, this is this idea of sustainable development, sharing, and working together to solve kind of common problems, but looking at that through particular cultural lenses. So I thought this was a really nice way to kind of promote global citizenship, because it gives students that extra confidence. And wow, I'm actually using English because I have to, because they don't know Arabic and I don't know Spanish. So we have to use a common language to present our ideas and get new ideas as well. So I thought it was a really nice initiative. And I think I would like to see a lot more of this in the future, certainly within published work, but also outside of published work. So this is only if you're using this particular product can you access this virtual classroom exchange, because it's related to the projects which are within the. So if you think about the project I just showed you, your students would have had to have done that project to be able to present it. So this is why that only schools that are using that particular course can access that. But maybe they can in the future think of ways to expand that out, to have that more generic, I guess, not necessarily connected to a project within a course book. For example, if I think about advancing futures, so if you go to the Macmillan English website and look for advancing futures, your students can also feed into that. Actually, it's a similar kind of idea. They can put anything they want on ideas for how to create a better world, basically, into that particular platform. So look for advancing futures. You can Google that and look that up. That's just one. I want to move on because I've quite a lot to get through, and I've only got 5 or 10 minutes left. Global citizenship, now you'll find that very kind of tangibly within the units. Again, getting students to work together, to come up with ideas, to think about how people have similarities, how people have differences, and how we can work together. It could be the improvement of readings. I mentioned that in the past, readings were quite often shoehorned in. They're like, we really want to practice this particular grammar point, and this reading kind of lends to that, so we'll use it. Now it's also very much around getting students to think about the world around them. In this particular unit, it's around what happens to your genes. Where do they come from? Do you throw them away? Do you recycle them? Do you upcycle them? All of these types of things, getting students to think deeper about the world around them. And even within the stories, we've been looking at the hare and the tortoise. We could have done this story. And again, it's getting them to think about the consequences of our actions, which is very much around sustainability. Sustainability really for me is being very conscious about the consequences of the actions that we take in the world around us, and not visible, but also less visible consequences as well, the kind of wider consequential. And then projects. So again, I was mentioning the exchange. This could be one thing that students have been doing. So they've been working perhaps for a couple of lessons on their project. This one is all around recycling, for example, and they're given it step by step. So they perhaps watch different recycling initiatives from different parts of the world. They think about that, they plan out, they create their own, and then they have to present that. And it could be broad. It could be thinking about recycling in your kind of community in general, but it could also be, how can we improve recycling within the school? Or how could I be recycling within the classroom? So we think about these kind of growing spheres, and a teacher can kind of pick where they feel like their students can really kind of create focus on that. They would then create this project, and they would then present this to a class somewhere else, and they would then share ideas. And this is, again, promoting that global citizenship and the SDGs in a really nice way, in a very structured way, I think, for students. So we've got quite a lot around the kind of teaching, kind of what content we use, skills, kind of extending that out around global citizenship. I think another area that publishers do a lot of work in, certainly for me, because this is where the bulk of my work is in teacher development and support. And I think there's a huge amount of opportunities for teachers to access professional development. Of course, the internet has massively helped with that. COVID has probably even pushed that along quite a lot. Things like this, so the Educast conference that we can access for free. So it's not always I can only develop professionally if I've got the money to be able to afford to be able to go and do a master's or my Delta. And even with those things, there's been a lot of change over the last few years. You can now do your CELTA online. You can do an MA in professional development online. So I think now teacher development is viewed differently. I would say it's more continual than it's probably ever been in the past. And I'd say it's also probably now becoming a lot more inclusive as well. I think teacher development, again, like teaching itself, was probably a very top-down initiative, certainly within the world of publishing. Experts or authors would come and deliver content to teachers on new methodologies or new coursebook content, it could be. And then they would take that on and deliver it in their lessons. And now we have this, I think, and I'm really kind of proud of this, really, is this more kind of bottom-up opportunities, I think, for teachers to get involved, not just be the recipients of teacher development programs, but to actually get involved themselves. There's a lot more discussion, there's a lot more inclusion around teachers being able to share their expertise. And we've worked really hard on this. I certainly have been trying to do a lot of stuff on promoting this bottom-up approach to teacher development and seeing expertise in cultural contexts. I don't know whether that's because I did kind of social and cultural anthropology, that I think of things in terms of bottom-up, in terms of expertise within particular cultural contexts. But I'm not sure that was in the world of ELT really widely regarded in the past. And I think it's become a lot more prominent now, which I think is a really good thing. And we can see that on a kind of global level kind of feeding in. I think about our new voices. So Macmillan, in September 2024, they invited teachers from all across the world to be able to submit into a new academic program called New Voices, where people could, if they'd never presented before, get support with doing a presentation in a Macmillan event. And we've done several of these at a more local level as well. So I think this area has changed. Research, I'm not going to focus too much on this because we're running out of time, but I think that research from 1975 to 2025, again, is massively different. Techniques are far wider, far deeper. The way that people conduct research and where and how they conduct research, of course, allows us to have a much richer insight, I think, into what happens within not just the classroom, but what happens within, I guess, teaching and learning more broadly, I think. Again, people, if we're thinking about that topic of teaching reading skills, researchers would have, picked several classes, studied them, created a journal article, and then presented that at the conference. Now we have a lot more, and again, this is probably anthropology, a lot more integrated approaches, a lot more qualitative research happening, and a lot more discussion around that as well, I think, which is a really good thing. And the reach of that with the internet and ease of travel from then till now, I think now we can have cross-cultural studies and all sorts of things going on. And it can also be connected to our professional development. So, for example, Macmillan have the Insights Index, and we have a local one in MENA Insights, where we try to make sure that the activities that we are creating, that we're investing in, are informed by the teachers who are going to be receiving them. And people can get involved with that, and there are various benefits, I think, to people's professional development from doing that as well. Okay, which brings us to the last one and the last few minutes. Before we do that, we've kind of missed out on our story a little bit. We've kind of jumped ahead and talked about a lot of different things. I'm going to try and go through some of the comments in the chat box, but I've also blanked these out. So we're coming towards the end, and I said that there was a twist to our story. So let's go to number 5. The hare runs very fast. As we remember, the race started, and he laughs. Ha ha! Look at the tortoise. I have time to... Anybody want to hazard a guess what he has time to do? Make sure you guys haven't been falling asleep while I've been... Take a selfie. Love it. Yes. It's time to read, sit and rest, to have a nap. I think people thinking about the more traditional story. Have a look at the story. We're thinking about critical literacy here. We're engaging at a deeper level. Do sports, have a nap. I have time to win. I have time to cook. Nice. Watch a TikTok video. Good one, Petra. Think about what's in his hand. Reach the goal. No, he's never going to reach the goal because he has time. In the traditional story, yes, he decides that he's so arrogant that he decides he's going to relax. He has a little sleep under the tree. But now he does not sleep. The hare sits under the tree. The tortoise walks by. He's very slow, but he doesn't stop. Go now. Yes. Again. Yes. Great. Ha ha. Look at the hare. with his computer game. This is my chance, says Mr. Tortoise. So again, this is the twist that's, of course, technology. And again, we can have a conversation with their students around whether or not maybe they do this, maybe they get distracted posting selfies, or maybe they find that they zombie scroll, they have an addiction to scrolling too much within their iPad or their phone, and what impact that has. We're not paying attention to what's going on around us, maybe. Again, nice thing to talk to students about. And of course, so that then leads me to the last box, which is, of course, technology. And our last question that we're going to ask. Of course, technology includes AI, which is the question I'm going to ask about. But this includes a whole range of other digital and technological advances within the field of education, but also socially, I guess, as well. But we now use digital products, digital services, digital tools to not just deliver content, we use it to assess. I was an IELTS examiner, and where I used to do face-to-face speaking tests and write handwritten writing tests, both of those things are now done completely online in the context that I used to do it, which I find fascinating that they can now do speaking tests through Zoom. I don't know how they control whether or not they've got posters behind the screens. I have no idea how they control that. And they can submit texts into automated marking systems. So there's all sorts of ways of using digital tools to deliver and assess teaching content. We also use digital tools to adapt, to be able to differentiate, as we were mentioning before. Again, we could have come up with some ideas around how could we have used digital tools. So we now have that story in an animation. So some students could be doing it with a paper version. Some students could be doing a different activity using the animation. We have a recording. They could just listen to the story and then have to imagine it themselves. Again, this is a skill that's probably being lost a lot for students, this idea of imagining what we're listening to, because they're so used to having this visual stimulation when it comes to content. So we can use digital and technology to adapt for different learning needs. Again, if students have dyslexia, for example, there are tools that we can use. If they have ADHD, if they have autism, there are tools that we can use to help our students engage with our content so that it's not just directed at each and every person in exactly the same way. So let's move on to the question itself. Question is, how will AI, this is a food for thought question. We don't have to answer this. How will AI change the future of publishing? I hear a lot in conferences that I've been to in this year and last year. And there's that kind of classic question, how will AI replace teachers? I think everybody kind of agrees that no, it won't. But I hear less conversations around how AI will change other aspects within the field of education, publishing being one of them. So how will AI change the future of publishing? Some sub-questions behind that. Well, will publishing become replaced? Will AI be able to create content and deliver that content? And how would it do that? Who would be in control of that if it wasn't a publisher? All of these kind of questions, I guess, maybe need to be addressed in the future. I'm not sure. I'm not the person that's responsible for that, perhaps. Someone saying it will reshape the publishing to be more creative and catchy. Yeah, absolutely. It probably could. Another question, will authors become replaced? If people can generate content, the big question is, well, what's the need of an author? Now, that's a very extreme question. I think authors, just like teachers, will probably not become replaced. But the way that they create, the way that they author, perhaps will change over time, certainly from our 1975 very traditional coursebook authors. Again, we've seen things within publishing. Very often you don't just see one author on a complete course. Now there's lots of authors doing different pieces, and that's put together like a puzzle now, I think. So that's one change. Will AI deliver training? We're thinking about teacher development, professional development. Again, very much delivered by people at the moment. How will AI change the shape of teacher development, professional development, courses? We can access courses online. Will we need other people for that in the future? Will AI be able to control it? Will it be virtual reality? Will I just go into a classroom with other teachers? I don't know. Will other people come in as an avatar? Who knows what will happen with these types of things? But the big question, I think, that probably most people think of is, again, when it comes to publishing, should we rush into AI? Or we're going to relay this back to the analogy at the beginning. Does slow and steady maybe win the race? We can be very eager to be, okay, we need to jump on this. We need to incorporate AI because we're worried that somebody else might do that. But actually, what are the implications? We're thinking about sustainability. There are consequences, of course, to all of the actions that we have. And these are as yet unforeseen. So this is just food for thought from, I guess, things that maybe I think about as I interact within the publishing industry and within the field of education. Let's see what some of the people have put. Was there anything else? Let's finish our story, and then I'll read some of the comments. And of course, we're getting to the end. So the tortoise walks and walks. The computer game ends, and the hare stands up. Oh no, look at the tortoise. Quick, I want to win the race. Hooray! Well done, tortoise. You're the winner. Now I have time to check my emails and play a computer game as well. We won't answer the question. Does the tortoise deserve to win? He waited to do his emails and he won the race. Of course, there are lots of things. I think maybe this sounds like I'm trying to say that we should be the traditionalists. I'm absolutely not saying that. I just liked the analogy for this idea of innovation versus tradition, I think. Doesn't mean one is better than the other. There are, of course, pros and cons. And creating a balanced approach, I think, certainly to how we innovate, where we innovate. There's been a load of great innovations as we've looked at. These things have really helped the classroom experiences of a lot of students around the world, and it will continue to do so. And I'm sure AI will become an integrated part of that. Should it be the only? I think absolutely not. I think a slow and steady approach to the incorporation. I think as long as it's driving communication, collaboration, thinking about these SDGs, thinking about how students can be better, then I think that's absolutely a valid reason to use AI. If we become, as I heard somebody mention the other day, if we're just becoming teachers who are teaching them how to become better prompters, to be able to answer questions or find information, then perhaps we should think about more deeply how we're using AI in the classroom with our students. That is my LinkedIn. Hopefully you've enjoyed perusing my mind and joining me on this exploration of thoughts and ideas and historical and cultural applications and changes within education over time. Hopefully it's given you some things to think about. Hopefully there was a little bit of integrated practical elements in there as well, thinking about various aspects of teaching and learning that we do all the time. Now we might be able to change some of those things and again focus on the experience of our students. But again, thank you very much from me. And again, a massive thank you to the Educast team for putting on such a wonderful conference. I hope you guys have all enjoyed it. And I hope you enjoy the last couple of sessions. Stay there, stay with them, hang in there till the end. And I'm sure it'll be fantastic. Let's show a lot of support for the guys coming up.